Hey guys, MoiDawg here, and today I'm happy to announce that the latest update to the game, Squad v7.2, is officially here. And with it comes some absolutely game-changing new features. From dozens of new sub-factions with unique vehicle and fob layouts, new weapon handling changes, the introduction of map voting, new vehicles, and much more, Squad is feeling better than ever. In this video, we're going to go through all the changes and cover all the patch notes so you'll know exactly what to expect when you hop in game. But I want to first start off by saying that there's something about this update that is just leaving me speechless. We can finally honk a horn in Squad! Oh my goodness, I cannot believe how awesome this is. It might be silly, it might be stupid, whatever, but this is the new quad bike for the Americans, and I am so hyped. Think of it like the conventional factions bike. It's incredibly quick, it carries 150 ammo, has room for a driver and a passenger that sits off on the back, and by pressing X, you can actually honk your own horn. However, I will say that this honking is client-side, meaning that you and only you can hear this wonderful, beautiful sound. I do kind of wish we had other horns in game, namely lodges and transport trucks, but I do understand why the devs wouldn't want to make it so that everyone could hear you honking. The spam during staging would be absolutely insane. Either way, if you're a combat engineer or an anti-tank player, do keep an eye out for layers with these new quads on it, as they're going to completely change the way you get around the map and ambush vehicles. Now, another new addition to the American forces is the M1128 mobile gun system. For as long as we've had strikers in Squad, we've had players asking for this exact vehicle, and it was worth the wait. This thing might be unreliable and a pain to use in the real world, but in Squad, it's incredibly fun. Slapped on top of a striker chassis is a massive 105mm turret, which fires 6 AP Sable rounds, 10 heat, and 2 white phosphorus smokes. It's also got defensive smoke launchers and a coax machine gun, and drives just like a striker, but unlike a regular striker, you do have to be really careful about your ammo rack. Located in the rear of the vehicle is the ammo storage, which also means you have no room for any extra passengers, but that's probably a good thing since with its incredibly thin armor, don't expect to really take many incoming rounds before being blown up in a fiery explosion. This thing is the epitome of a glass cannon. For gunners, you'll have a stabilized optic with a 2x zoom, and as you can see, there's a lot going on in this sight here. On the left, you have ranging for heat, on the right, you have coax machine gun, and in the center, you have your sabot. This curved line here indicates the trajectory of the round in flight. Oh, and did I mention how cool the autoloader sounds? The commander has a nice 360-degree stabilized optic with a 3x zoom, and there's even a 50 cal slapped on top of the turret to help defend against incoming infantry. It has about a 70-degree firing arc, and although it moves independently of the turret itself, if you want to see anywhere else around the vehicle, the turret gunner will have to move it physically for you. Overall, the MGS is a great addition to the game, and you can play it if your team picks the 2nd Cavalry Striker Brigade. Yes, this is an exclusive vehicle to a completely new aspect to Squad: specialized combat units. Every faction in game now has a number of specialized units broken up between air assault, armored, combined arms, light infantry, mechanized, motorized, support, and amphibious assault. Now, as you can see, not every faction has every single type of unit, but there's enough variety to cover all the bases between Blue 4, Independent, Pack, and Red 4. So if we take the 2nd Cavalry Striker Brigade, for example, our vehicle loadout would be the following. You'd have 2 transports, 2 lodges, 4 MAT Vs, 2 M1128 mobile gun systems, 1 Abrams tank, 1 Blackhawk, and if there's some water, you'll also have a few boats. But this is just scratching the surface. If you were to take the irregular armored squadron for the insurgents instead, you'll actually have things like 3 T-62 tanks, 2 BMP-1s, and a bunch of other offensive vehicles. If you go to the Chinese Naval Marines and you look at their 4th Special Combat Battalion, which is an air assault unit, you'll not only get 3 helicopters, but you'll also have 2 ZTD tank destroyers. The variety here is awesome, but the question remains, how do we actually get to play with all these units? What layers are they on? Well, that's where the new map voting system comes into play. Server owners now have the ability to turn on voting at the end of every round. Here, after you see the scoreboard, everyone will then move on to first vote on a map, game mode, and layer combination, and once that is confirmed, each team will then vote on their specific faction and unit combo. Once Team 1 has their selection, it will then move on to Team 2, eventually showing the new matchup before loading the next map. We no longer have map, layer, and faction combinations like we did in the past. And instead of 15 different Yeho random advanced and secure layers, we now instead just have Yeho RAS V1 and V2. These layers will now only determine the objective layouts, and the factions and units you select in the map voting screen will then be placed on Team 1 or 2 accordingly. All in all, Squad has reduced the game's layer count from 453 layers down to just over 200, which means that the devs can now focus on making interesting map layers and fun objective areas without having to worry about the vehicle and faction balance on those layers. These map layers can now be balanced separate of the factions, and the factions can now be balanced against other factions on a unit by unit basis. But that's not all. Not only do these unique faction units have specialized vehicles, but they also have unique deployables. For example, to make up for their lack of armor, airborne and light infantry units now can deploy a second ATGM on every single fob, while support units, which will not only get that added ATGM, but they will also have access to enemy intel, meaning they can actually see how many vehicles of each type the enemy has, or if they're on a respawn timer, as well as having an extra hab on their fob. Yes, a double hab is no longer an insurgent-only perk, and players will now have to weigh the pros and cons of every single unit and faction in order to pick the best matchup. Now, because there's just way too much in here to cover every single unit, I've included a link to the spreadsheet provided by OWI down in the description below. There's a lot to unpack, and some units will also have slightly differing loadouts depending on if they're in a game mode like Random Advanced and Secure, or maybe if they're attacking on invasion or defending on invasion. It also depends on how large or small the map is. It's incredible the amount of depth and added replayability that OWI has included in the game. And despite the first couple of days of this update being a little bit trolly with some layer matchups like insurgents invading Sumari against the Americans defending, I've already begun to see some really cool and unique games that I would not have seen in the past with the previous layer combos. I really think it'll take the player base about a month or so to start to learn these units and potential fun matchups, so do get on in there and start having fun with all the new loadouts. The only way you're going to figure out what works and maybe what works better is by playing it, and playing it on a different wide variety of maps. But before we move on to the gameplay changes, I do also want to reiterate that this map voting feature is server dependent. If servers do not want to include this, they really don't have to, and can instead force matchups through various server config files. Personally, and the devs can confirm this, I was really against map voting when I first heard about this, but after actually now getting my hands on it and seeing how new and fun it's making the game, I'm all for it. Hopefully, we'll get some more specific filters in the future, like preventing individual game modes from playing too often, but this release is surprisingly good. I'm blown away by how much fun I and everyone else is having, and I am excited to see more. Alright, moving on to the gameplay, the biggest changes in Squad v7.2 are those to weapon handling and recoil. Since the infantry combat overhaul, a big concern by the player base has been how bad some of these weapons handle, and that has been addressed. We're not reverting anything, we're not removing the ICO, but there have been tweaks. The Mini-Me, RPD, G3, FAL, SKS, and Mosin have all had their weapon sway reduced, and it's pretty drastic. I tested all of these weapons before the update and then after the update. I tested with every single sight available on that weapon platform, and I tested them at half stamina, a quarter stamina, and no stamina, and I can confidently say that these are incredible changes. You still have the ICO feel to these weapons, but they don't act like they're completely uncontrollable, and they just feel like you're finally shooting and controlling your weapon. But they didn't just stop at these specific weapons. The devs also addressed Ironsight ADS and scope pictures. We can now raise our weapon much quicker than before. The old offset where it looked like you really couldn't line up your rear sight with your front sight has been sped up considerably. This has been one of my biggest complaints since the ICO was first implemented, and I can tell you right now that the usage with these iron sights just feels so much better. Now, if you do have little to no stamina, you're still going to have to wait a sec before having that clear sight picture, but in general, this feels so much better. For optics, the devs also reduced scope bobbing. This is a mechanic which made a lot of the scope black appear in your sight picture when it was swaying, replicating real-world misalignment. Many players had mentioned that this was incredibly disorienting and in some cases would even cause motion sickness. Now, this actual visual scope bob has been removed without actually touching the weapon sway. Yes, let me reiterate this. It is a visual change. The weapon is still swaying just as much, but because you're not seeing that scope bob in and out, it feels so much better to use. If you're one of the players that have just not been able to use long-range optics since the ICO dropped, now is the time to really try them again. Oh, and did I mention that they also fixed the sway with binoculars? Yeah, it's beautiful. We have our binoculars back. On top of that, recoil has been reduced for snipers, the SV98, the Mosin, and the C14. But that's not all. Squad has finally introduced manual bolting. Now when you fire your bolt-action rifle, you will have to click to fire and then click once more to pull the bolt back. This gives you complete control over your bolt, and it makes it much easier to see where your round hits, especially when using those higher powered optics. This manual bolting plus the reduced recoil has made snipers incredibly effective and should be back to being very good assets for your team instead of a simple liability. Now, some other nice gameplay changes are in machine gun traverse ranges. Both deployable and mounted machine guns have increased their ranges significantly. For the cord and 50 cal bunkers, you now have a 130 degree traverse, while tripods have 170 degrees. For the machine guns on helicopters, Samir cars, and boats, you now have nearly 180 degrees as well, making all of these vehicles much more effective. For the vehicles, we also have a number of changes as well, from helicopter respawn times being nerfed from 6 minutes to 10, to AAVs having not only their survivability increased with properly modeled sight armor reducing damage from incoming rounds, but also increasing the speed and acceleration of the vehicle itself. Additionally, the Canadian Leopard has had a much needed quality of life change to its gun sight. No longer do we have to manually range the thing, and frankly, this took way too long to implement. If you never used a Leo before, you not only had to hold X and then scroll to adjust your distance, but you also had to just guess sometimes if the range wasn't marked on the sight here. In 7.2, we have a nice clean sight. When firing Sabo, we can see that the center is now 200 meters, with just left of it being 100 and right of it being 400 to account for the arcing of the rounds. 500 meters is just below, and then it even has hashes up to 2100 meters. This is such a nice change for tank crews and should bring the Leo up to par with other modern MBTs. With this update, we also have some changes to weapon skins. You can now purchase the new Jungle Pack available for the PLA's QJB machine gun, QBZ carbines, and PF98 anti-tank launcher. These skins are only available for use on woodland maps, and honestly, I do think they look pretty cool, but I'm actually more interested in the change they've made to the existing skins, which actually adds an alternate worn variant. This beat-up type look is actually what I would prefer to use in-game, and it's really nice that the devs have added them to players who own the skins for no additional cost. There are also a few other changes like reduction of SKS recoil, ADS speed changes for the G3 reflex and optic, and many more bug fixes. I'm not exaggerating here when I say that the devs have fixed over 100 bugs, touching on things like the dreaded RPG fake reload bug and helicopter rubber banding. They even had to publish a completely separate blog post just to list all of the bugs that they fixed. It's honestly really impressive, and I'm happy to see that we're not only getting cool content like the mobile gun system and quad bike, but we're also getting huge new replayability features like map voting, all the while literally hundreds of bugs are being squashed. I don't want to say I'm surprised, but I will say that OWI has definitely nailed this update. But what do you guys think? Is map voting a good thing? Do you like the detail and direction we're going in with all these new sub-factions and units? Or are you just happy to be able to hold your weapon straight again? Let me know down in the comments below, and if you like the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more. But that's it for me. Until next time, peace.